Welcome back to another magazine flick through video. So this time we're looking at Edge again, and we're in May 1994 and it's issue 8. So the big thing this month will be the big fight between the new machines that were coming out, the Jaguar, the 3DO, the CDI, CD32. And yeah, we know where that went in the end, but it's nice sometimes just to see what's happening at the time, because I don't think anyone really knew which way it was going to go. So yeah, we've got a concept for the Saturn which is similar but not quite the same as the way it looked. I think this looks a little bit thinner. Yeah, the CD32, too little too soon, yes and no. It was just unfortunate that Commodore ended not too long after the release of it. And we've got the arcade scene doing its thing. I think, is that Galaxian 3? Might be. But certainly from the arcade at the time, the 3D was way better than what we had in the home. Okay, so we've got Mega Drive Boost next up, Mars. That is the 32X. This was codenamed Mars. And yeah, I think it was a nice idea that for a not ridiculous price you could get arcade games in the home, but I think the problem was that the arcades were just evolving that fast that while Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter they were fine for the time, I think by the time the 32X came out they were a little bit long in the tooth, although they are good games. So Daytona as well. So yeah, it's clear for Sega the future is between these two machines, and I think it really confused people. They didn't know which way to go. At the time I was looking at either a 32X or a Jaguar, and I ended up going for the Jaguar in the end, just because I thought there were more decent games on it. But looking back, difficult to say really. Yeah, Clockwork Knight, that's a good game. It's a good example of 2D and 3D done at the same time. Daytona on display, yeah, this is the future, isn't it? That was an impressive game when it first came out. I remember seeing that and thinking I really want a Saturn to play that game, because we knew at the time it was coming out on the Saturn. Mega Race. Yeah, I found a copy of this in the loft the other day on the PC. It's an F&V game, and you've got like a road that's played back as a video, and your car just goes left and right, and it's a bit basic, but it was fun at the time. So we've got, yeah, Sega Model 1, so this is Star Wars Arcade, which also came out on the 32X. That's a good game. It's a good reason to own one. So what have we got here? We've got Shoot 'em Up. So we've got Final Lap. Yeah, that's more like a Sega Super Scaler game. It's not quite like Ridge Racer. What's this one? Nebulous Ray. Don't believe I played that. That looks like Lair Section or Galactic Attack. It might be that. The names keep changing from different regions and whether it's arcade home. I think that might be Galactic Attack. Jurassic Park. That looks like... Is that Metal Slug? No. Not. That's Neo Geo, isn't it? S&K. Yeah. Gujuko Parodius. She looks a bit bored. Right. Nah, that was known. Right, so this is the thing, isn't it? The PSX, the PlayStation 1, I don't think anyone really predicted that this was going to occur, you know, that Sony would make such a really good 3D machine. And from the early screenshots, you look at Daytona and you look at these and you think, the Saturn's clearly the more exciting machine. It's got better games, it looks better. And then when it came out, we realised that wasn't really the case. Particularly with the conversion of Ridge Racer, which was really good as a launch game. It really was a good competitor. So Iron Man head for the scrapyard. This is NEC, the Tatsujin. Now, was this the PCFX? It might be. because there's a lot of pre-rendered stuff there, so it's got a CD drive. I don't recall whether, so it's saying, so real-time programming rendering as seen on the Saturn and the PlayStation won't be a feature of the NEC machine. Yeah, this will be the PCFX, which didn't do very well, I don't think. It's a shame it wasn't backwards compatible with the PC Engine. That could have been a really nice machine, but most of the games are F&V games. I don't recall many standout titles on it. You don't really hear much about it, although I have played one at Play a few years back. 2 versions of the card available. Oh, yeah, these are the upgrades. So this is the arcade one. If you had a PC Engine and you had the CD unit, it freed up the cartridge slot, or the what do they call them? The PC Engine cards. I forget what they're called now. It freed up the slot, and it meant that you could get a new card that would increase the RAM of the console. So they managed to keep upgrading the machine by just putting more RAM in it, which was impressive with what happened. So this was the last one. This is the arcade one, and there were some really good conversions there. You got Fatal Fury 2, and there's Strider there as well. Some people like that, some people don't. But yeah, so they're saying they're going up to 18 megabit there. So we're looking, yeah, 3-4 megabyte, which isn't bad. Yes, yeah. So that's saying 16 megabit. So that's 4 megabyte, isn't it? No, 2 megabytes. Sorry. Times it by 8. Yeah. It's a nice idea. I think that was a good example of an add-on that actually worked. Yeah, 3DO. This was a really expensive machine when it first came out. Edge really supported this machine. They were really quite keen on this being the future, and I think this got here first with the new machine. So you got this and the Jaguar and the CD32, and this was clearly the most impressive at the time. The Jaguar had some good titles, but I think the 3DO had the edge when it came to the library. But it was not quite as good as people thought. The sprite scaling and games like Street Fighter 2 on it were really good, but it wasn't that much of a leap considering the price, sadly. But I've read a few things about the development, and the machine was crippled a little bit because of the memory that it had available and whatnot. I think a few sacrifices were made. So yeah, Miyamoto with a copy of Edge. It's quite amazing to see his I suppose rise to becoming quite the famous, I suppose, game celebrity that he is now. Yeah, he's really done some good work over the years. So yeah, they're talking about the Jaguar there. Will the basic Jaguar be supplemented by CD-ROM with an extra graphics chip? There's been a lot of talk about this on forums, and I think there's a bit of confusion about whether the Jaguar CD had any extra hardware, because it was meant to have a chip to improve the texture mapping. And there is a game called Hover Strike CD, and when you go really close to the textures, they do get filtered, but that seems to be just done by the internal hardware. I think it's the only game that does it. But yeah, the CD-ROM was just a fairly cheap optical drive. Atari didn't really put any other extra hardware in there. Yeah, Cryo, they used to do a lot of adventure games. Archer McLean. So what's he working on at this point? Would it be Jimmy White 2 at this point? Maybe that was a few years later. What's this, 26? That looks like Super Monaco. F1 Championship Heavenly Symphony. Ah, Mega CD. Yeah, it had a different name when it came out in the US. It was something like F1 Racing to the Edge. Something like that. I did a video of that on my channel a few years ago. impressive game on the screenshots, but it doesn't move very well. Yeah, so we've got Road Rash on the 3DO, which that is a good game, and the game that sold the Jaguar for me, which was Alien vs Predator, which still holds up pretty good. It's not a bad game at all. Road Rash, yeah. I mean, this was the future. I remember seeing this on a 3DO. It was like a games market years ago, and I remember seeing this playing and thinking, wow, this looks really good. This looks so much better than the PC did at the time, and even the Jaguar. I think it was when I saw this I realised, this machine has the edge. No pun intended. But yeah, it's a really good game. It got converted to the Saturn and the PlayStation, and they look a little bit different than this graphically. There's a few subtleties. If you watch videos, you'll see them, but all three are good games. I do enjoy them. Yeah, F1 World Championship 1993 Heavenly Symphony. That does look good, you got to admit. It has the edge over the SNES because the SNES only had mode 7, which was the flat ground, but this has all these sprites, scaled sprites around the outside. It's just that they were quite jerky. Oh, here he comes. Oh, it's the other one this time. Hello. Right, I thought I would get away without having a cat this time, but it's the other one, it seems. The little one's asleep for the moment. But yeah, this game did look pretty good, and I think it's just a shame that there weren't more games like this that used the sprite scaling and the Mode 7 at the same time. Games like, it's talking here about Thunderhawk and Sonic CD, but I'm thinking of the core design games with Thunderhawk and Soulstar, and what was the other one? BC Racers and Battlecore. They were really good titles that made good use of the hardware, but unfortunately this one wasn't very smooth. I think it was trying to do a little bit too much, but at the time you'd have been impressed. Inferno. This looks like a PC game, I believe. It doesn't say, does it? Yeah, it's probably PC. So you've got CGI and you've got 3D. It looks like a flight sim. Don't know much about it, but I think with Edge they always had really good screenshots. I was listening to a podcast the other day from someone that used to write for Edge, and they were saying that they felt in the early issues the screenshots weren't so good, and that having this aesthetic was really important to the magazine. And I think it did matter, because sometimes you look at some of these games and you think, wow, that looks good, but how does it actually play? What do you see when you're playing the game? They're not always the same thing. It's really quite abstract, isn't it? I mean, you look at these and they look like some of the styles from the indie games that you get now. Don't know if that game ever came out. Maybe it did, but I haven't played it. Ocean Software. Yeah, so these guys were moving into the 32 generation as well, and I don't recognise these. Look at this. Clockwise Apeshift Jaguar. I've never heard of that game. I'm going to have to look at that and see if it's on a website. You know, these websites have beta versions of games. I don't think that got released. Green Lantern, never played that one. Right, it seems his lordship wants feeding. I've already fed him this morning. I'm doing this on a Sunday morning, quite early, but no, he wants a second breakfast. So, yeah, so they're talking about the Jaguar here. We see it as a creative challenge rather than a technical challenge. It certainly was a technical challenge. It was quite a difficult machine to program for. There have been quite a few interviews over the years to say how it's a weird machine, whereas if you do work on one CPU, you can't access the bus from another one, and it just bottlenecks the whole machine. Oh, that's a simplification. Other title, Lobo, and that was meant for the CD drive. It's really quite amazing just to see how much of this stuff was going to come out for the Jaguar, and it never did. What's this one? Yeah, that's Green Lantern. Yeah, I think that one did come out. It's a shame, really, that this was really the end of the the 2D era, and there was some really nice looking games that just never saw the light of day. Alien vs Predator. I'm looking at some of these screenshots. These must be the alpha ones, because I don't know how clear that comes out, but that alien sprite isn't in the game, and that's the Queen, who only appears in one point in the game. One CD. This wasn't a CD game, this was a cartridge game. But this looks so good. It was the first game by Rebellion, and at this point I think it was almost like a bedroom program game. It was by a really small team. But yeah, I think that the thing that was a big deal here was that the textures were all done by photographs. So they weren't like Doom, which were hand drawn, and I think even though the geometry of the levels is pretty simple, it's a lot simpler than Doom. It's more like Wolfenstein, but with textured floors. It made up for it because it was on a space station and the textures look realistic. I think it made a big difference. Yeah, that's a really good game. It's worth getting if you can. If you've got a Jaguar. I don't know how well the Jaguar emulates now. I've tried it years ago and it wasn't great, but this didn't come out in anything else, at least not that version. But yeah, really good game. The Lost Eden, Cryo. Yeah, these used to do a lot of adventure games, and they were trying to push interactive movies. So yeah, it's meant to be similar to Doom. It's trying to make June, sorry, not Doom. June is in the film. Interesting, this thing. Designers try to make use of the CD-ROM too often. The gameplay gets the life squeezed out of it. That is true. That is true. And I think magazines and buyers were starting to realise this, that these graphics that you were getting were nice, but they didn't really integrate very well with the gameplay in a lot of cases. Some examples worked, but a lot didn't, I don't think. Yeah. Don't know if that ever came out. I'm quite a big fan of adventure games, but that one never heard of. Top Hunter on the Neo Geo, is it Neo Geo? Yeah. Never heard of that one. It looks a bit like a Guardian Heroes style game. It's almost like, it's not Metal Slug. Looks a little bit different in its visuals, or Metal Slug style. But it's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up, beat 'em up thing. Yeah. Don't know. Never really hear much about that game. Don't know how good it was. Yeah, Nigel Mansell makes it to the CD32. The thing is, you look at that and you look at that F1 game on the Mega CD, and this looks less impressive, at least in the screenshots. And I think this was a big problem with the CD32, that it is an Amiga 1200 more or less, and it's got the AGA chipset, but the Amiga had been out a long time by that point, and I think people who really like the Amiga would have already had an Amiga 500 or a 600 or a 1200 if they got into it recently, and there wasn't much of an incentive really to upgrade, because a lot of games for the CD32 were already out on the Amiga, but if you didn't have an Amiga, it was a good machine to get into the library. This was my first Amiga. I never owned one back in the day. I used to own an ST. I bought one of these when I was at uni, pretty cheap, and really liked it. I got a lot out of the machine. 'cause it's got. I did a video on it. You can get the SX1 add-on, so you can plug a keyboard in and boot Workbench, and it becomes an Amiga 1200 more or less. Yeah, Microcosm. Yeah, it's just another example of trying to do something a bit different with full motion video and gameplay sprites, a little bit like Sylpheed did, but that was really well integrated. I think Microcosm wasn't quite as slick. But, yeah, comparing it to the CD-TV, I think this was different. I think this had a slightly different market. It was clearly a games machine. You got your FMV cartridge there. I don't know if any games took advantage of that. Sensible Soccer is going to be at Sensible Price. Yeah, that came out the CD32, didn't it? Yeah. Reckons the Amiga for polygons is pretty slow when compared to a PC. Yeah. This machine was not a 3D polygon machine. There were some conversions of, games that were similar to Doom, like Gloom and Fears and later on Genetic Species, but the machine was not really designed for games like that. Although it did have a chip to do, the CD32 had a chip in it to do chunky to planar conversions that didn't really get used very much. I don't know if that would have made much of a difference for these FPS style games or not. Yeah, so inside it's a 1200 more or less with a CD drive. Yeah, what have we got here? More CD32 software. Is that the Killing Games show? No. Similar art style though. Autodesk. 3D rendering. Dat tape. You don't really see those very much now. Lover's Guide, available on the MPC. What's MPC? Don't know. It must be PC. CD-ROM and Mac CD-ROM. Now, if the CD32 would have had this, I'm sure it would have sold a lot better. It's like VHS. Leader of the pack. Yeah, okay. So we are starting to see Ridge Racer, but I don't think it was clear at this point that the PlayStation version would look almost. It's not arcade perfect, but it's pretty close. Yeah, at the time when I started to see what was coming out on the PlayStation, I very nearly bought one. But a friend of mine at school was a big Sega fan, so was I, and we were both swayed by the arcade games. You could get a game like Sega Rally or Daytona on the home. That did it for me. I mean, they are good. Well, Sega Rally's a good game. We think we can make 100% translation of Ridge Racer to the PlayStation. Yep. I think it only took them 6 months as well. Yeah, this still looks good. There was a big machine, I think it was this game, it was Galaxian 3 in Scarborough years ago, and it was 4 or 8 player, and you sit in front of this giant screen. I believe it was a Laserdisc that was streaming the video off it, and it looked really good. Really nice machine. I don't know what happened to those. I gather they've all been dismantled now. But yeah, I mean, Namco was quite a big deal at the time. You could see here it's Namcot, which was the home division, and there were quite a few good games on the PC Engine. So I own a few of those, and I think they're pretty good generally. But at the time, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think there were that many that came out in the West, in Europe. I don't recall seeing that many in shops until the PlayStation really came around. Nebulous Ray, that's that game again. Is this layer section? I don't know. I'm just looking at this now and I'm thinking, no, these look CG rendered sprites, so don't know. That probably did come out on the PlayStation. But yeah, I mean, so you can see from here, these polygon sprites, I think none of us were really prepared for the texture mapping that happened. Future Zone, yeah, that became Game Zone eventually, which became Electronics Boutique. It's then merged with Game in the end. I used to like the shop. It had a really nice industrial design to it inside. Test screen. Yeah, so we're seeing previews of new technology, but the games that you know, down on the ground, and reviews are all still going to be 16-bit. There was still life in these machines. So yeah, 3DO, NFL. There was this, and there was the FIFA game, and they looked pretty good. They weren't too ambitious, but I think they did something a little bit different with the 3D perspective. Something you couldn't really get on the SNES and the Mega Drive. Mortal Kombat 2 is coming out. I do have a few Games Master magazines. I bought a bundle off eBay probably about 4 or 5 months ago. I might go back to them a little bit later. I don't want to jump back and forward because it's probably not a good idea to be covering the same month of multiple magazines, because you're just going to see the same things. Mega CD32 magazine. Saw a few issues of that. I don't think it lasted very long. Subterranea, Mega Drive, good game, really good game. It plays a little bit like Thrust on the BBC. And with the art style, I used to believe this was an Amiga game originally, but it seems not to me. It was made exclusively for the Mega Drive, but I remember seeing it thinking, this looks like it's an Amiga conversion, but it's not. Really good game, hard, really hard. Can't get very far on it. Ultimate Tiger. Yeah, Tiger's quite a well-known arcade top-down shoot 'em up. What machines is for? Oh, it's the Marty. Later on it was the FM Towns Marty, which was the console, which was essentially a 386 PC. Got 8 out of 10. Yeah, those machines like the Marty and the what was the other one? The Sharp 68000 were really nice machines, but we just never got them over here. So Telegames, which is still around now, they've still got quite a big inventory of Atari games. I don't quite understand Telegames. They've got this inventory, and they do make games, but they must be a pretty small company. You don't really see that much coming out from them. But what they did, they bought out at the end of the Atari's lifespan, so in '96 they bought out a lot of their incomplete games and released them, you know, finished them off in some cases, and released them, like the ones that were already completed and just never got published. They got a straight release. But yeah, they supported the Lynx for a long time. At this point, '94, the Lynx was pretty much dead. Even the Game Boy was getting a bit long in the tooth, and the Game Gear was, you know, it's a Master System really. I think that was looking quite dated as well. It's a Star Trek game on the PC, that's a good game. CD-ROM today. Tempest 2000 on the Jaguar, the reason to own the machine. Yeah, this is a good game. This is a good game. There's not much to be said about it. It's fantastic. And I think if you've got a Jaguar, you've probably already got this. And if you haven't, there's a Saturn version, there's a PC version, I believe, and there was a version of it called Tempest. Was it X3 on the PlayStation that wasn't made by Jeff Minter, but I think it's an upgraded conversion of it, which is still meant to be pretty good. And then you got TXK. Yeah, fantastic games. It's quite simple visually, but I think that's what makes it work. And you've got all the colour palette as well, so you've got these really nice gradients on the Jaguar, which you couldn't really do on the Mega Drive. Virtua Racing. test screen. Expensive game, $69.99. I remember that well, and I mentioned this a few times. So they're talking about the frame rate, 12-15 frames a second, is a great mover. That's quite funny to see. 12 to 15 frames is a great mover. I mean, now it's not acceptable to go below 30, really. You really want 60 in some cases, but 15, yeah, I can't see how a younger generation are going to get into this, because I think when we saw it in the arcade, it was something we didn't get at home, and the fact that we got a conversion of this was a big deal. And I think you mentally you'd paper over some of the cracks with it. It's it was just a big deal, and if you stuck down 70 quid for it, you'd play it regardless. But it plays really well despite the frame rate, and it's fast. Yeah, it says 2 player, there's no slowdown. It says pity the SVP only allows 16 colours on the screen. That wasn't a problem, I don't think. There was a lot of dithering in it, but for the graphic style, 16 colours, it looked fine, I think. Yeah, that's the arcade version. Yeah, you can see that there are more colours and more polygons, but essentially it's the same game. Multi-Mega. Yeah, these are quite sought after now. I saw one of these years ago in Game in York, and it was still pretty expensive at the time. When it came out, I remember it being quite pricey. Wish I'd have bought one now. It'd been worth, well, probably wouldn't have sold it, I'd probably still kept it, but it's nice. It's a nice machine. Spinmaster Neo Geo, haven't heard of that one. Strider on the PCB, that's an arcade. The Strider conversion first appeared in 1989, but it was the inferior Mega Drive version that got the glory. Now Supergunners could play. Okay, yeah, this is the Supergun where you can buy an arcade board. Yeah, I think it's a bit unfair to say the Mega Drive version was inferior. It was a really good game for the platform, and even the PC Engine version was not meant to be as good. It had more colours, but it didn't play as well. Allegedly, I haven't played it, but from the reviews I've seen it, it's not great. Yeah, so in the charts, Aladdin, yeah, that was an impressive looking game. I thought the gameplay was a little bit repetitive. It got a little bit tedious, but it looked nice. Certainly impressive. Sensible Soccer, FIFA, Sonic Spinball. Didn't really get on with that game. Street Fighter 2, So Jam and Earl. Yeah, I mean these are classics, aren't they? For the Mega Drives, they're still played even now. Mario Kart. So your Nintendo games are still at the top. Mario All Stars, Aladdin again, Turtles, good game. Sonic CD, Liberation, Rebel Assault, Arcade. There's Ridge Racer, Mega Man X in the US, Japan. Look at these. Final Fantasy VI, Dragon Quest VI, Ogre Battle. So you've got your RPGs and your tactical RPGs, Virtua Racing, Samurai Showdown. Super Famicom. Another shot of Alien vs Predator and Magic Carpet. Now Magic Carpet, I don't recall there ever being a third person view. I might be wrong on that. I wonder if that got changed. Off-World Interceptor. Nice looking little game for the 3DO. Guardian. Yeah, this was a pretty good 3D game. I was saying that the CD32 didn't really have many 3D games. This was a good one. It's interesting seeing some of the job adverts for games that were coming out. I wonder if you can predict what companies were doing. Iguana, were they 3DO? Did they do Gex? Maybe. Programmers must be fluent in 68K, 6502, that's C64, 65816. What was that? Was that the SNES CPU? Forget, it might be. But it's interesting to see 6502, and still want that technology. California Dreams. What's this one? Crystal Dynamics. Yeah. I think that they were the ones that did Gex. Sega. If you have 68K or Z80, yeah, so definitely Mega Drive and possibly Master System Game Gear programming as well. Yeah, the Mega Drive had a Z80, which was the Master System CPU, but it used it for sound. Graphics programmers, 3D artists, console programmers. Yeah, so this was an interesting issue, but I think there's still a lot of speculations. We haven't quite seen what was going to happen. Actually, I don't know who. Oh, 3DO again. Yeah, I mean, these machines were either about to come out or they'd just come out, and I think a lot of people didn't have them in their homes. We didn't know what the games library was going to be like, so there's a lot of interest in them. And I think the penny then dropped that they weren't quite all that they were hyped up rather to be. And I think once the Saturn, PlayStation 1 were here, that was it really. Yep, famous dinosaur from the PS1. Was it 60 frames a second? I don't remember that. While the Jaguar has a 64-bit multiprocessor architecture, it uses much slower Motorola 68K. Yeah, this CPU was in the Mega Drive, and it was using the Neo Geo, Amiga, ST. It was really well understood, and it was in the Jaguar, and it was meant to be a controller in a way that the Jaguar had these two, call them 64-bit CPUs. They were really DSPs, and it was almost like a GPU in a way, and you were meant to push all the graphics and the sound and all the maths onto these CPUs and use the 68K as a controller for the two. And what ended up happening was it was used to do conversions from the Amiga and the Mega Drive in a lot of cases. Some people called it lazy, but I think if we hadn't have had that, we wouldn't have had all the really good conversions that we did, like Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer on the Jaguar. So I think that was a good thing in the end. But those games didn't really make good use of the hardware in a lot of cases. I think they used the GPU a little bit, but then again, it was meant to be a really hard machine to program for, so you can't win either way. How many polygons per second can Virtua Fighters handle? Virtua Fighter, isn't it? I think the sequel had fewer, but it had texture mapping. AM2. Yeah. Oh, that's next month. Do I have next month's? So this will be June. No. Is this May? What are we looking at? It's May, isn't it? So it'll be June 94. I don't recall if I have that one, but that will probably be coverage of either Virtual On, or it'll be more Daytona, I believe, because Sega Rally was AM3. So yeah, interesting issue. Not a lot of 16-bit stuff in there, and a lot of interviews. I think this is why these magazines, Edge magazines, are quite nice to have, because it's interesting just to read what all the hype was about, and just to see what happened in the end compared to the way things were described. But it was an exciting time. Right, so I think I'll leave it there. I've got a few more issues of Edge, and then I've got some issues of early PlayStation magazines and Saturn magazines, so we're in the 32-bit era now. So yeah, thanks for watching.